using deductive reasoning to verify conjectures. Our objective is to apply the law of detachment and the law of syllogism to logical reasoning. Why learn this? You can use inductive and deductive reasoning to decide whether a common myth is accurate. Well, what is deductive reasoning? It is the process of using logic to draw conclusions from given facts, definitions, and properties. Let's look at a couple myths. Urban legends and modern myths spread quickly through the media. Many websites and TV shows are dedicated to confirming or disproving such myths. Is each conclusion a result of inductive or deductive reasoning? There is a myth that toilets and sinks drain in opposite directions in the southern and northern hemispheres. However, if you were to observe sinks draining in the two hemispheres, you would see that this myth is in fact false. Well, since the conclusion is based on a pattern of observation, since you are observing the sinks and toilets draining this way, it is a result of inductive reasoning. Let's try another myth. There is a myth that you should not touch a baby bird that has fallen from its nest, because the mother bird will disown the baby if she detects human scent. However, biologists have shown that birds cannot detect human scent. Therefore, the myth cannot be true. Well, the conclusion is based on logical reasoning from scientific research. Therefore, it is a result of deductive reasoning. Let's look at one of our laws. The law of detachment. If P then Q is a true statement, meaning if your conditional is true, and P is true, then P is true, and then Q is true. So, let's look at the law of detachment. If two segments are congruent, then they have the same length. AB is congruent to XY. So the conjecture is that AB equals XY. So identify your hypothesis, which is two segments are congruent, and the conclusion, they have the same length. And if your statement that comes right after your first if-then statement refers to your hypothesis, then your conjecture would refer to your conclusion. If that happens, it's valid by the law of detachment. It's actually following the law. So, therefore, this conjecture is valid. Okay, well, let's look at B. If you are tardy 3 times, you must go to detention. Shay is in detention. The conjecture is Shay was tardy at least 3 times. Shay is in detention refers to the conclusion of your conditional statement. If you are tardy 3 times, then you must go to detention. Well, you are tardy 3 times is your hypothesis. Shay is in detention, or somebody is in detention, is your conclusion. So therefore, it's not following the law of detachment, so it's not valid. Let's look at the law of syllogism. If P then Q and Q then R are true statements, then P then R is a true statement. Let's look at an example. Determine if each conjecture is valid by the law of syllogism. Okay, if the measure of angle A is less than 90, then angle A is acute. If angle A is acute, then it is not a right angle. So you have your P, your Q, if Q, and then your R. So therefore your conjecture must state P then R. So if the measure of angle A is less than 90, that's your P, then it is not a right angle. There's your R. So if P, then Q, if Q, then R, therefore your conjecture would have to be if P, then R. If it follows that pattern, it's valid by the law of syllogism. If it does not follow that pattern, then it is not valid. Okay? Let's try the next one. If a number is divisible by 4, then it is divisible by 2. If a number is even, then it is divisible by 2. Conjecture. If a number is divisible by 4, then it is even. So if P, your hypothesis, then Q, your conclusion. So if P, then Q, you should have if Q, then R. Your Q is it is divisible by 2. If a number is even. That is not your Q. So it's not following the law of syllogism or the pattern that it should be following to be the law of syllogism. That makes it not valid. Let's practice drawing conclusions. So we're going to apply the laws of deductive reasoning, so either the law of syllogism or the law of detachment, to try to come up with a conclusion from the given information. So, if a team wins 10 games, then they play in the finals. If a team plays in the finals, then they travel to Boston. The Ravens won 10 games. So this one's almost following that pattern of the law of syllogism. If P, then Q. If Q, then R. So your conclusion should be if P, then R. So then they travel to Boston. All right, well, let's look at this next one. If two angles form a linear pair, then they are adjacent. If two angles are adjacent, then they share a side. Angle 1 and angle 2 form a linear pair. So we have if P, then Q, if Q, then R. So your conjecture would be if P, then R. So we have if angle 1 and angle 2 form a linear pair, then they share a side would be your conclusion. And that concludes our lesson on using deductive reasoning to verify conjectures.